Yes, friends. On a Tuesday, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, also covering the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast. And yonder is Andy Makowitz, the healthy, wealthy, and wise season ticket generational holder fan of the New York Football Giants. A little out of order, but I think it still works. Andy, how are we this morning?
Adam, I'm doing great. Golf over the weekend was great. We didn't talk about it really at the last show where, the guy kind of had a choke away on 18. Justin Thomas won. I'm still thinking about it just because Justin Thomas released something yesterday that said, "Hey, guys, if you don't think anything is possible, I shanked a ball on a par 3 just like any one of you guys would, and I still ended up winning a major tournament. Anything is possible." That's the type of positivity I want here on a Tuesday.
Okay, I'll take the anything is possible. Yeah, it's great as we continue our discussion around some position battles. But we all know, get in the comments here, guys. We got to curtail this golf talk that Andy tries to bring to this podcast. It's one giant podcast. It literally, golf might be the antithesis of what football represents from the requirements, the physicality of it. But nevertheless, we appreciate that. As we dive in on previously, we were talking about the offensive line. We're going to get into the secondary here. There's an interesting question that I think maybe OGP is out on an island here a little bit by themselves. But coming off of yesterday's show where we were talking about the offensive line, specifically highlighting what Shane Lemieux has been doing and showing here coming back from his injury, you talked a bit about Nick Gates as well. There was something I wanted to note because it came through in the comments. A lot of people were saying, hey, PFF is not the end all be all. And we talk about that on the show a lot, right? Like what it means to take a grade and say, well, is that indicative of who this player is or is not? And it triggered a memory for me going back to Shane Lemieux's rookie year, where you and I at a certain point along the way, and you highlighted this yesterday about Andrew Thomas has said, I like playing alongside Shane Lemieux. He seemed to look better with Shane Lemieux next to him. But there was a game where Shane Lemieux came out with a 0.0 PFF grade. And we had a conversation the following day or later that week where you said, like, I don't know everything about X's and O's of football. And yet the eye test told me the dude is out there. Is it all perfect? No, but he looks a lot better than, again, a 0 seems like a hard thing to do. I don't even know if Matt Pert earned a 0 in games last season where he was clearly showcasing that he had a regression, right? So worth reminding people and acknowledging that even though his pass protection was the area that needed work, we certainly remember our eye test in his rookie year telling us that he is capable of developing and being successful in this league as a starter.
And listen, yes, it's crazy to get a 0. It's like, did you not put a single hand on a player? Like, did you whiff every time? Did you just fall down at everything?
You get points just for putting your name on the paper, guy.
Just by standing there, your mere presence, and they have to go around you, at least get you like 20 points on Pro Football Focus. But yes, I do think tongue in cheek that he graded out as the worst pass blocking guard in all of the league in 2020. I get it. Some of those zeros. Right. Yeah, I mean that was part of it. Getting a 0 in one of the games is just ludicrous. Was he as bad as maybe the grading suggested? Maybe not. But at the end of the day, he probably certainly was probably still in the bottom 10 of guards. I will say this too. I saw a couple of different comments from some of the OGP listeners saying, but he looked really good in the first half in pass protection against the Broncos in week 1 before he hurt himself. And let's just take that with a grain of salt, Adam. It was literally 17 snaps. So, it's just such a small sample size that, they run the ball 5 times. They drop back for a couple of incompletions. No one's blitzing from his side. How much of a sample size can we get to say he went from the worst to a solid, if not good, pass protection guard? I think time will tell on that piece.
And this is the hard part about whether offensive or defensive. There's guys that, regardless of the regime, we liked in the draft classes over the last couple of years, and yet whether it was opportunity or injury that kept us from getting that secondary sample size. We're going to cover some guys on the defensive side of the ball that kind of have these mystery question marks around them because you go, I don't know for sure what I should be able to glean out of it. Another player, just quickly here, before we turn our attention to the defensive side, because yesterday we were talking about, well, Shane Lemieux is going to be in a position here to hold off Ezeudu potentially coming in. I just wanted to hit this quote from Joe Schoen in speaking about Joshua Ezeudu. He's a player that we liked, obviously, Joe Schoen said after the selection of Ezeudu. History of playing multiple spots on the offensive line. He's got guard tackle flexibility. Again, we'll bring him in. I'm not sure, not going to say exactly where we're going to start him, but we like the versatility that he can play guard, he can play tackle, compete to start probably inside with outside flexibility. I thought that this was tying into that Nick Gates comment discussion that we were having yesterday. You pulled me in that direction of saying, hey, there's some value there. We'll see what he looks like physically, obviously, in this camp. But in some ways, the two key words I take out are bring him in to start for Ezeudu, right? Like Joe Shane is saying, we took this guy high enough in the draft where we have expectations that he'll come in to start, and labeling 3 positions on the interior that he can be in camp and compete and find his best role potentially. Maybe center is included in that. I tend to doubt it. But then there's the versatility of depth of saying, and if you're not ready for week 1, if Shane Lemieux does look really good, well, now all of a sudden we have this movable piece that we know, injuries and otherwise, you can be there pushing some of these other veterans that we have on the roster and maybe along the way taking over a starting role at a different position, potentially. Excuse me.
Adam, I don't want to derail exactly where we're going to go with this discussion, but I saw a comment made someone that analyzed the Giants draft online, and it fascinated me, and I can't get it out of my head, and I wanted to just share it with you and get your thoughts.
Let's do it.
The thing that was mentioned was what Joe Shane and Brian Daboll decided to do in their draft class, and every decision that they made was based around the NFL being a passing league. Whether it was an offensive player or a defensive player, every single decision that was made was with the idea that this is now a passing league. You think about Ezeudu's flexibility, his agility, his pass protection. It's one of the things to look at when you hear Shane Lemieux struggles and needs to get better in pass protection. Bring in someone like Ezeudu that has that is one little piece of it. And I'll say one other thing. Look at Kayvon Thibodeau. You have to get to the quarterback because you know they're going to drop back to pass. You need an edge rusher. You look at Evan Neal. Right tackle in pass protection was something that the Giants sorely missed. Look at Cordell Flott. Versatility, flexibility, nickel passing packages. Look at Dane Belton. Safety. You want these athletes that can come down and blitz in pass-heavy schemes. It just made me think, like, wow, the Giants really had a lens of, on the offensive side, being able to pass the ball effectively, and on the defensive side of the ball, be able to protect against the pass, whether it's to rush and get pressure or be able to defend in certain schemes.
You know what? And the last note here to tie into what you're saying on this quote from Joe Shane on Ezeudu specifically, he's impressive. It's rare. I was fortunate enough to see him play twice this year, Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh. He's a big man, and it's impressive. Again, he can play multiple spots, not only on a week-to-week basis, but within a game, within drives. So it's very impressive, and he's an outstanding kid. You guys will like getting to know him. The athleticism, the versatility, that's something, to your point. We talked about it over the years here. There's been players that we liked, and we're going to turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball here and some of the position battles that are going on with a note around these depth chart projections that we see out there, obviously around New York Giants coverage and the NFL overall. But you have to remember, think about the number of times. So Will Hernandez was a great example of this, right? You can like what he does to whatever level he played at. And also you could tell there was athletic limitations to his game. His style of play, not surprisingly, was about hog mollies, right? Moving bodies in the trenches. Well, that can leave a little bit to be desired when you're trying to get out on the edge to work in space. And I'm not looking backwards here. Same thing for Shane Lemieux, defensive side of the ball. I loved Lorenzo Carter, not because I thought he was going to be a Pro Bowler. I liked him. And also inside of his game, I had to acknowledge, well, this is a guy that's a little bit stiff, right? Not as flexible as you want him to be. Maybe can't quite get around the edge as quickly as you need to. That is a limitation by today's NFL standards when you know it's going to be a pass-heavy league and you're going to need to find ways to get after the quarterback, to protect the quarterback, to work in space, to be dynamic. All those things that we've talked about ad nauseum in this turnover from one regime to the next. It really does come down to, how do you make sure that you have versatility and that you're modernizing? That's the bottom line. Modernize with where the NFL is today. And it's something that the Giants hadn't done for years. We all saw it, the need for it. And that's the turnover that you're seeing with some of these, and maybe why some of these projections got taken a little bit sooner. Final thought before we turn our attention over to the defensive side.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And Will Hernandez is that old school, old guard, as you mentioned before, Adam, like, in the trenches, pushing people, going to beat them up, win the run game, win the run battle. And what we're realizing is that's not where the NFL is going anymore. You're seeing more spread offenses, and you're seeing.
And you can still do that. Like, you can still function that way, but not if your offense is a Brian Daboll, Josh Allen, Mike Kafka, Patrick Mahomes, right? Spread out, speed option kind of offense, right? Like, this offense cannot thrive with certain players like that. Unlike if you still have a pocket quarterback, you can still get away with just, bullies in the middle that can protect and allow that pocket, a la Tom Brady. Let the man work inside of that little pocket and get work done. It's just not going to work for the Giants going forward. And every team, no matter what, still needs to get better, more athletic.
Agreed. Yes,
The other
it's simple answer. Joe Burrow led the league in yards per attempt passing. They were a passing team, but had a good mix of Joe Mixon, being able to run the ball competently for them. That there's just different styles for different play, and Daboll wants to do things a little bit differently. I think when you talked about the defensive position battles, because we've got a lot of meat and potatoes coming in on the back end here.
Sure.
One thing that we wanted to talk about that's very difficult right now, as it sits, we're in OTAs, organized team activities that are completely voluntary. And the tough part is that means that the Giants won't release a depth chart yet, right, Adam? So what we have to do is we scour the internet for people that are basically, putting their finger up and seeing which way the wind is blowing and deciding how to make depth charts. For instance, ESPN or RLads or any of the places that you go for your depth charts will look drastically different. Some of them have people starting, other ones have them as fourth string. It's interesting to note, like, you got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because they're projecting just as much as anyone else is, and none of it is set in stone until the Giants officially release something.
No, of course. And that's what, when we start to talk about these, and you mentioned we were doing the pre-show about, Dan Dugan, and he's at the practices, or, Jordan Renan, and trying to give indications of these players look good, right? They're talking. Now you start to try to disseminate between what is Giants messaging versus objective opinions around these positions, but you're trying to take whatever you can get and form some opinion around what could be the scenarios here as we work our way through what's going to be a long summer. They're going to finish out this week. They actually have a day off tomorrow. Then they'll finish out the week. They'll come back next week and do a little bit more of the OTAs as well to continue along through their offseason. But here's where we came into this question, and we're going to touch on a couple of spots here. When we focus on the secondary, and we've brought up this player before, and we're going to give a couple of positive notes here. The stats aren't just all on one side of this equation, but I said at the top, like, are we as a podcast on the wrong side of this perception around what's going to occur, or what we think is going to occur in the secondary? We know that you had Logan Ryan, you had Jabril Peppers, they're both gone. You still have the young star in Xavier McKinney. We think that he's ready to take that next big leap forward. And then you have Julian Love. That was the existing, and into that mix, you added Dane Belton. You obviously added Yusuf Corker as an undrafted free agent. And then just in the secondary overall, you also added Cordell Flott. There seems to be this notion, and we've heard it in camp, and I like what I'm hearing from Julian Love. He likes Wink Martindale's system. He likes the attitude. He likes the approach. He's happy to have another chance to, figure things out and continue to evolve his game. But I mean, am I missing something around Julian Love and what we've seen? Regardless of bad coaching and everything else that's gone on, Julian Love was brought in to be the slot cornerback. That's what he was drafted as. That's where he started with the Giants. Then he kind of moved to a flexible nickel safety-ish role. And then when he got into the safety room, he was put behind several other safeties and then became a valuable special teams contributor. I'm not saying he's not capable of having a larger role under this regime than he did previously, but I'm not sitting here assuming that he is somehow the lock to start with Xavier McKinney.
Yeah, Adam, it's strange because we made this comment before about Julian Love potentially being a cap casualty, depending on what the Giants need to do. And
we went a big step further, right?
I mean,
we're not about not being on the team.
We got some serious pushback, and then that's when you and I kind of off the show, we're like, wait a second. Are we the only ones that are seeing what's going on here? And to your point, he was brought in as a slot cornerback, has been moved around. He's talked about in camp, which is all positive, about I finally have a role on this team. They want me to do something that I can just prepare for. Whereas under Joe Judge and previously, he was either playing slot corner, outside corner in a pinch, safety when they needed him, and they were just moving him around as kind of the jack of all trades. So yes, I can appreciate all the positive things that are coming out. I'm seeing a lot of articles though, Adam, come out saying like he's ready to lead, he's in a position where he feels comfortable to be a leader on this team, and I don't know, Adam, I'm not seeing it the same way that everyone else is, and I'll tell you why. It's not for a lack of wanting Julian Love to succeed, because you highlighted him rookie year saying you wanted to see more of him. You still continue to say we'd love to see Julian Love perform. The problem is I just haven't seen it over the course of his career. We talk about Pro Football Focus, not necessarily the huge metric to go after, but he's been a 54 or 55 on the field the last 2 seasons for the Giants in whatever roles they've asked him to do. Coming out of college, he ran a 4.54 40, so it's not like his athleticism was jumping off the page. And so when you take those things and couple them with 2 other pieces, and I want to get your thoughts on it. One is that he's from an old previous regime, and the Giants just spent a mid-round pick on Dane Belton, which I will get to Dane Belton in a little bit.
Mhm.
But the second piece is also, if the Giants really need cap flexibility or need to make moves, and they have a longer-term view in mind, I don't see the world where Julian Love is up for a second contract with the Giants. So you're sitting here where if he just gets outright released, the Giants save $2.5 million in cap space, and they have about 160, 170 grand in dead cap money, which is next to nothing to free up space. So am I just not understanding the value and importance of Julian Love?
Well, and I guess, and here's the thing too, because I'm gonna highlight some positives around it. But to your point, this is the final year for him. So again, and we always say, and you said this a lot last year, which I think was right. A lot of people did to me, where I was like, just start the young players. Like I don't want to see veterans, right? I want to see every young player that they had on this roster. I wanted to see the youth movement. I don't care about having the Nico Laloses of the world on the field, right? And you do have to balance, obviously, having the product on the field, having quality, having reliability and consistency, and then try to balance that with moving forward and moving on. And if Julian Love, to your point, could you bring him back on a team-friendly deal after this year? Sure, you could, but you also brought in these other players, and you also are going to have another draft class and free agency. You wouldn't think. I would not right now put any money or my life on Julian Love being a part of the Giants beyond this season. Now, just to clarify, they did use him as a safety in his rookie year, then switched him to a DB just as far as how he was labeled on rosters, and then went back to safety. Now, if you want to go positive here, you can talk about the fact that on the positive side, he went from a missed tackle percentage of 9.8, 7.2, and down to 5.7 in this last season in his, again, limited role, though. Started 16 games out of a possible 48 over the 3 years. Completion percentage against them, and this is where we're going to get to why it matters this offseason and who the Giants brought in. 65, 71, 71 as far as completion percentage against. The yardage per target, 6.5, 11.5, a really bad second year when they, again, tried to move him around a little, and then back to 7.3 this past season. There are some positives inside of there. Like you can say this is a guy who's developing. However, he's also I think he gave over 100 and, I wish I still had it up here. North of 110, I think, QB rating when he was targeted in the passing game. And the reason why this matters relative to what the Giants are looking to do here is Dane Belton, as we say, again, this is who he is as a prospect, nickel safety, good in coverage, athletic. Like that is the role that he's going to fill. And we just talked about on the offensive side and on both sides of the ball. It's about modernizing to where the NFL is going. You need versatility. Xavier McKinney can do multiple things for you from the deep safety position, as can Dane Belton. And while PFF cannot be, I'm not hanging my hat on it, the one thing you have to acknowledge is that Belton earned a 77 overall grade in his final year at college and also a 82.3 in coverage. That's what they need from the extra safety position. Someone who could drop down into nickel coverage if you needed him to. So you could send McKinney or Belton down to pick up player X if it turns out to be a pass play on second and long, second and medium, third down, key situations. So far to this point, Julian Love has showed that that's where he is suspect in. And that's why I think if he ends up sticking around the roster, I could see him being the backup situational safety for this defense. But I'm miles away from thinking that in his 4th year, a contract year from a previous regime, Julian Love is now going to evolve in an area of his game that to this point we haven't seen him being capable of. He's a little bit undersized. He's a little bit slow. He's a little bit stiff-hipped. And again, it doesn't mean I don't like him. It doesn't mean I don't think he can be a part of the team. But this disconnect, as we're saying, between Julian Love, key starter and contributor, that's a big jump, even previous regime or not, bad coaching or otherwise. The sample size of what you do individually on the field can still be examined, regardless of if the overall was not necessarily the perfect situation.
And Adam, I'll take it a step further.
All right.
Dane Belton, to me, fits Wink Martindale's system better than
Yes.
Julian Love does. And we talk about the system fit quite a bit. We understand Julian Love is now in his fourth year. He's a quote unquote veteran, understands where he needs to be, understands the speed of the NFL. I totally get that. Dane Belton ran a 4.43 40 from the safety position. He is crazy athletic. The scouting reports on him say big play ability. He has the ability to, they said in a blitz heavy scheme, Dane Belton will flourish. And so to your point, Adam, when you think about someone playing alongside Xavier McKinney, you're actually going to get the best out of Xavier McKinney with someone like Dane Belton next to him, because Dane Belton can get to the quarterback. He can get there very quick because he's athletic and he's super fast. His agility is a little bit of a question mark in terms of like some of the short bursts.
Not as athletic as you want to be in the modern NFL, but
right. But he's got great top line speed, big playability, will flourish in a blitz heavy scheme. And what that does, and you talked about his PFF coverage grades and being able to drop back in coverage, it does allow that versatility between him and McKinney. You never really know who's going to be dropping back, who's going to be getting to the quarterback. And that's the idea in Wink Martin's system that works the best is you have 7 guys standing up near the line of scrimmage with only 2 or 3 guys with their hands in the dirt. And all of a sudden the quarterback's trying to figure out who's coming after me. And if you see Julian Love out there and you're saying, more often than not, he's probably going to be filling one role, as opposed to Dane Belton and Xavier McKinney, where it's like either one of those could come from either side, and I don't know where the coverage is coming from yet. It's just another reason why I just think in my head, Wink Martindale saw Dane Belton and was like, I could use a guy like that in my defense.
Let's touch back in here a little bit. All fantastic points, by the way. Touch back a little bit into the total secondary here and that depth chart piece that we're talking about, projecting these names. On the final note, that Dane Belton also obviously was a first team all Big Ten player who forced 8 interceptions, which led to, which was the 5th most among safeties in 2021. Like you say, playmaker, right? That's what you want. Now you're talking about having a second playmaker there in the secondary. Again, happy to be proven wrong that Julian Love is on this roster and helping this team, being a veteran leader. Maybe he has that role, right? Maybe he buys into Wink Martindale, and that's the kind of thing that he gets to be in the locker room for a relatively young defense. I just don't see the Giants investing the way they did in the draft class and in this offseason without thinking that they're going to move in a different direction. When we look at the secondary overall, then the key player that they brought in here, adding into this secondary group, Andy, that now as we're going to highlight some of these depth charts and the way speculation can be everywhere right now as far as who should be in line to start, who could be in line to start. And then, as you just mentioned, who maybe makes sense as a dark horse candidate to be a contributor, understand that Wink Martindale has certain ideas in his mind.
Well, when James Bradbury got released and was signed by the Eagles, the Giants' big counter move, like a chess piece on the chessboard, was to sign a former Eagle cornerback named Michael Jacquet. And he was undrafted in 2020 out of Louisiana, part of the Raging Cajun squad over there. Didn't really perform very well. I think he was pretty limited in 2020. 2021, he actually had a 60 Pro Football Focus, just as an idea. Even a little bit better than Julian Love in terms of the limited snaps that he made on the field. He was another guy that came in. You're already hearing things from camp. On top of the Daniel Bellinger show, which is basically what OTAs are right now, where every single day they're like, and Daniel Bellinger with another like amazing grab. They seem to highlight different pieces of the secondary. It's, Michael Jacquet was the last one saying had a couple good pass breakups. Looks like he's getting his feet underneath him in camp. It's interesting because the Giants are trying to throw a lot of bodies to replace one body in James Bradbury.
Well, and not only that too, and don't forget, and I think you are correct here. And throwing Henry Black, and we mentioned him last episode, right? And I think just to kind of add this little add into the Julian Love situation, Henry Black, Green Bay Packer, 27 years old, backup. All right, fine. But guess what? Like he's the cheaper value to have it on your depth there in the secondary to be able to free up the money, maybe occupied by Julian Love or anyone else that you're going to look at on this roster. But to your point, I think right now I still look at it. We rounded our way into this of obviously Aaron Robinson is the guy that you believe in. He's the guy that has the speed and ability inside of Wink Martindale's system. I think that's where it starts. The interesting one for me is, and this again speaks to a little bit, we're not going to bring up any PFF grades about this at all. I'm going to live entirely on the eye test. I don't know what Darnay Holmes is capable of right now. To me, he feels like an incomplete as well. Do I think that he flashed and got a little bit stronger? Yes. Do I think that the lack of talent and ability to get pressure up front over the last couple of years has hurt every guy in the secondary in terms of what they're capable of? Of course it has. So it's fascinating for me to see Cordell Flott, slot guy, Darnay Holmes, by any metric you look at these depth charts, that's the intriguing battle with anyone else that they're going to bring in here, the Zion Gilberts of the world, et cetera, or the obviously they brought in Maurice as well, Kennedy. There are these other names there. Do you think that any of those ones are indicative of what could happen at the top of the depth chart, or is this the safeguard of, well, if you have an injury, veteran experience, guys are brought over from Baltimore that know Wink Martindale's system? Do any of these players you think have the opportunity to walk in the door from the outside and go, yeah, we have our young talent that we drafted this year, and then maybe some of those holdovers could find themselves dropping down pretty quickly?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, Maurice Canady is a name that you mentioned just because of how much time he spent in Wink Martindale's system. He was with the Ravens from 2016 to 2019. So it's not like he was there for a cup of coffee and they waved goodbye. Like, there may be some connection there where he's like, I know what I get from him. And at the very least, I have this baseline. He understands my scheme, my system, what my expectations are. And that's like half the battle in, being a depth piece on an NFL roster, right?
And funnily enough, as the offseason goes on, I wouldn't be shocked if some of these familiar players to a defense pop up higher, right? And then maybe they settle back down. But the just the instant of, yeah, I walked in the door. You wanted me to run the drill. I ran this drill for 3 years, right? Like, I know what you want me to do here. And then as younger players or other players get those reps underneath their belt, you'll see the competition and the talent level kind of come back to the median as far as who should be starting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So Canada is just one. Obviously, we're talking about it ad nauseum about familiarity in Wink Martindale's system. But I mean, listen, he was there for 3 years. If Wink Martindale didn't think he was capable of performing the task, he wouldn't have been there for as long as he was. He obviously left as a free agent. Signed, I think he went to Dallas and the Jets, and now has come back to the Giants. I wouldn't be surprised if he finds himself on the roster. There's so many guys, Adam, in terms of this secondary, and that's the Giants trying to figure it out. There's 90 people that are in this camp and going to be competing for a roster spot. You're getting rid of 40% of these guys, as we get closer to the season, but there are going to be a handful that stick around. But I'm curious, you mentioned Darnay Holmes. I mean, I haven't heard much of him. It feels like, you know, coming out of UCLA, there was an idea that he could be just a starting nickel corner. And we mentioned that some sites have him listed as the starting nickel cornerback right now. What's your take on Darnay Holmes? Do you think is he closer to being the starting nickel corner, or is he closer to not being on the roster? Like, I don't get it. I don't have a sense on where Darnay Holmes sits right now.
Yeah, the interesting one for me would be that he is 5'10, 5'10", buck 95. Like, I think that's what you would love about him, right? That's what you loved about him when he came out. And you thought, again, because of the way the NFL is today, it's not, oh, well, the guy in the slot's always going to be the quick, twitchy guy. That guy could be anywhere. Like, even look at the Giants roster now, right? You know that Kadarius Toney is capable of lining up anywhere on the field. Even Wan'Dale Robinson, whether it's slot, whether it's out of the backfield, right? This is about what is your totality of your defensive unit show to be capable of. So it's interesting to me to see if he shows that he has the quick hips, that maybe, is he quick enough at that height and at that weight to be able to be effective in the inside role on the defense? Now, you can also argue that in Wink Martindale's system, if you want to be versatile, maybe Darnay Holmes can show over camp that he has a little bit more versatility playing anywhere in the secondary, right? Maybe you can put him on the outside for stretches and look to mix and match on a week-to-week basis. So his size probably is to his advantage. And the fact that when you look, if you want to talk about depth charts, right, it's going to be, well, can Cordell Flott step up? Cordell Flott being taken where he was in the draft, I don't think you have to look at him and say, well, he needs to be a day one starter. You can ease him into it. So I'll put it this way, and again, this is where we're living. At the end of the day, if you told me that Julian Love isn't on the roster, but Darnay Holmes is, that makes more sense to me than the reverse. Like, it makes more sense that Darnay Holmes has every opportunity with his measurables to be successful in Wink Martindale's system, as opposed to the long-term prospects of Julian Love. So it's actually an interesting one, man, because I'll be honest with you. I could see Darnay Holmes, if he proves it in camp and you hear the positive returns, I could actually see him being a part of what Wink Martindale does big picture here for this defense.
That's interesting because I go the other way. At the end of the
Love
day,
it.
while I think that Darnay
Love
probably
it.
fits Wink's system better, I just think the lack of depth around the safety position is the one saving grace right now for Julian Love. If they had another competent veteran around there, you talk about Henry Black being one of them. It's like they had someone just a little bit better. The decision could be easier for the Giants to be able to save $2.5 million against the cap and go younger and try to get more athletic. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. I think the scarcity in the secondary in the safety position is what's saving Julian Love. I think the options, even a guy like Michael Jacquet, Cordell Flott being drafted, Aaron Robinson being there, are all things that there's so many players there that Darnay Holmes might be at risk of making the roster.
Yeah, it's possible. And I mean, listen, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. You're on this Rodarius Williams, right? You want
My
to
guy.
see him be successful. Yeah, well, listen, and sometimes you live by, you die by them. And we'll close out on this idea too. We've seen, as we always say, follow, subscribe to the podcast over on YouTube, get in the conversation, make it very clear, right? Like when we were doing the pre-show, you said, I don't know, like we're not doing a hot take thinking that Julian Love won't be here, but it feels like we are because it seems in contrast to where a lot of people are speaking to what he can be for this defense. I'm happy to be wrong on him. Like, make that very clear. We're not saying it for the sake of this will be interesting and maybe get some clicks. It is that like, this is the way it feels like it projects to us. Happy to be wrong on any of the young talent because it means that the Giants can be that much further along in this process. You can spend a little bit of money to keep some of these holdover players on their second contracts if you think they can offer you stability and some consistency on either side of the ball. But this is where we are. Like this is what it looks like to me. And it's only going to take Henry Black showing that he's capable as a veteran backup in this system and Yusuf Corker starting to get some buzz in and around camp to all of a sudden go, to your point, thin, but there's certainly an opportunity here, and we'll know because the facts are going to be Julian Love is in a position to be the starter. That's the position that he's in right now. And everything that you hear on a week-to-week basis out of camp and over the summer is going to confirm or deny that he's capable of doing that and also confirm what we think about some of these other players that have opportunities for Big Blue. Listen, that's the deal, man. I think we've done more than enough closing thoughts here. Get the podcast wherever you listen to it. And the YouTube, as we say, has been really awesome. We've been having great conversations over there. But please, Andy, say something to the people before we go, because I dragged it out here at the back end. You deserve to have a voice.
Simple answer to your point, Adam, is I would love, pun intended, to be proven wrong on Julian Love. I would love for him to show up, show out, be a Pro Bowler, be successful, be a two-headed monster between him and Xavier McKinney. Just because we're not projecting them to potentially either be on this roster or be a huge contributor doesn't mean that we're not still rooting for them. And that's what it means to be OGP and be a Giants fan at the end of the day.
Next thing we're going to talk about is edge rushers, linebacking core. That's going to be a very big deep dive because do you think there's questions in the secondary or conversations to have? We have exponentially more to discuss around that room, that defensive front. The front seven is so interesting over the course of this offseason in behind a lot of these key stars that we already know about. Until then, though, friends, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand you the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.